I have chosen to work with light because I believe it is one of the most important factors that surrounds us in our everyday life.
That is true. Light is extremely important in the urban environments. But what if I told you that there is something even more important, which is the darkness? And darkness is something that we are missing in our cities because we are just overstimulating it with light. That's why today we will be talking about this extremely important topic. Today with me is Pernille Bech-Larsen, who is the lighting designer working with sustainability and biodiversity at SLA, a known landscape architecture office located here in Copenhagen. Some time ago, Pernille has written an article for the magazine called Scape, in which she was discussing the importance of darkness in our urban environments. And this is something that I found extremely interesting. That's why we will be discussing today the importance of light and especially the darkness in everyday life, and also embracing the darkness in the way we design our cities, embracing it in urban design and architecture, and also discussing the importance of our circadian rhythm and health. How do we design? How should we design for not only humans, but also animals and biodiversity? What is the light pollution doing to us and also animals, birds, and even plants? And if we design for darkness, how can we make sure that the spaces we design are safe? That's a big challenge and big issue, I think, which we will be discussing in this episode, as well as the aesthetics and measures to reduce light in our cities. So let's embark on this extremely interesting journey about the darkness in our cities, together with Pernille. So yeah, let me just start then. Thank you for hosting me here, Pernille, at SLA's office. And welcome to Urbcast.
Thank you so much, and thanks for coming to visit us here in our office in Islandsbrygge.
And thanks for this invitation. As I said, I really wanted to discuss something that you work with. But there's this one particular topic that I would like to discuss today, which is designing for darkness and why darkness matters. This is an article, and not only article, but something that you work with at SLA. And I just found it extremely interesting because I think that if you think about the light in the space, in the landscapes, you often talk about how to make the spaces bright, how to make them safe by using light. But you are having this argument that we should actually embrace darkness in our cities. And this is such an interesting perspective that I would like to discuss today. Maybe first, before we dive into this topic, it would be great if you could tell listeners something about you.
Yeah.
And I think it would be a great start if you said something more about becoming a landscape architect and working with light here at SLA.
Yes, I can try to do that. My name is Pernille, and I have worked at SLA for a year now. Before that, I worked in architecture, and I have chosen to work with light because I believe it is one of the most important factors that surrounds us in our everyday life. No matter if we want it or not, we are very affected by daylight, artificial light, too much light, or maybe too little darkness. And my background was originally in daylight and how that affects us as human beings. But understanding more of how we as humans spend our day moving from the indoors to outdoors and inside again, then I also started to sort of dive into understanding this rhythm that we have, our circadian rhythm, and why it is very important for us to make sure that we get proper exposure to the right light and preferably the natural light. And that also, of course, led me to understand what it means for us if we do not experience darkness. Like, let's say more and more people move to city centers, or we have these mega cities that never sleep. This allows us as humans to have access to everything 24 hours a day. We do not have to go to bed when the sun goes down. We do not have to sleep when it's dark. We can basically do whatever we want, but it is just not very healthy. And I found that to be so interesting. And after understanding this, I felt that it could be super interesting to figure out how this also affects the life outdoors, or you could say animals, plants, biodiversity. And then I am sort of diving further into this topic. Yeah, I hope that answered your question a little bit. So I am actually not a landscape architect, but I'm here because I think it is very important how light in our exterior environment is creating spaces.
Were you also working with light in the previous years? Because we actually, we used to work for the same company at
Exactly.
Larsen Architects. I remember you from there. I, for example, switched from being an urban designer to being a business developer, actually.
Yeah.
So it's still within the architecture industry. And how was your story? So were you also actively working with light there, or is it something that you kind of revisited after some time?
I actually have a bachelor in visual communication. So I used to work more with sort of branding and marketing stuff. And then I switched with my master's degree in lighting design. And I think it was very important for me how we communicate with light, both when working with architecture, but also when working with landscape design. Like, how do you create the story of a space? Or we often in architecture work with this narrative, right? So I feel like it was sort of a natural transition for me, but it is also it is very much driven by something that I'm super interested in, and I don't know if I feel like it's like of course it is a change of career to change from Pernille Larsen and working with buildings to SLA working with landscape. But in my previous job, we also have in-house landscape architects, and it's a big privilege to be able to work with both the inside and outside of a building, if you can say it like that, like the transition from outdoors to indoors, and sort of design this change.
Definitely. I think it allows you to think holistically while discussing design around the buildings and for the buildings itself. And this is something very interesting to me. That's why I'm very keen on discussing, especially urban things or urban side of architecture and also landscape side of architecture. And I think that the topic of today, the importance of darkness, a phenomenon that we humans are distancing ourselves from, is very well suited for this discussion. Why is it that when we discuss lighting design, we paradoxically should discuss more the darkness and this intersection between light and darkness?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think you being in BD, you probably know that you have to sell something, right?
Yes.
And I think that in many cases, when you have a client, it's probably easier to sell like light. It's also easier for me, maybe in a project, to say like, this is what we add to the space, you know? The darkness is there if we don't do anything, right?
Exactly.
So that is the paradox here, that we want to do as little as possible. But what is the very interesting thing is that, and it's very, very good, that it's trending more and more with this focus on darkness, or at least the focus on creating less light pollution, creating urban spaces that, how do you say, it should be safe for humans at night, but it should also maybe be a bit more careful with the negative effects we sort of pose on the nature that is there. Because if we want to enhance the experience of the natural night and we want biodiversity to thrive in our urban spaces, then we also need to create some better conditions. But it's also very important for humans to have access to this darkness at night because our sleep rhythm gets affected. We all know it we heard the story of the blue light, right, from the screens.
Which is very bad.
Exactly.
You should avoid it.
You should not look at your phone right before you sleep, yet we all do it because the phone is like present. But I think it's just, for me, it's very, very important to talk about. Maybe darkness can be a hard word sometimes, but at least talk about allowing the night to be darker than the daytime, right? And as part of that story, in this house, we work very interdisciplinarily. So I have anthropologists, colleagues, biologists, and we talk about the nightscapes of the city from different angles. So one thing is to reduce light and to look at darkness, but we also try to design with an idea of here is the place for the animals and here is the place for the humans. So let's say we have a park and then we can create some paths that can be safe or be perceived as safe so that humans want to go. And then other places we don't add any light because then that can be for the animals to hide or forage or nest, so that you sort of try to take that into considerations. One of my colleagues, she's very passionate about bats and she's like specialized in that. And we have many talks also about like how different species sort of have different preferences with light and darkness also. And it's very interesting for me.
What are the other advantages of darkness? Because darkness can have this bad connotation, as you said, and we are talking about going to the dark side. And darkness, in general, doesn't have such a good vibe around it, I would say. Why is it good for us? You mentioned the circadian rhythm, which is something that maybe we could develop a bit more.
Yeah.
And along with some other advantages for human beings. Why cities shouldn't be waking up all the day and the night?
There are many ways to dive into this question, I feel like. So let me start with maybe if we talk about the circadian rhythm. So maybe we all know that we have some sort of sleep-wake rhythm. In humans and in animals, this circadian rhythm is controlling many different aspects of our everyday life that, like, hopefully people don't notice too much, but we may know this idea of the early birds and the night ravens. I don't know if that is a very Danish way to say it, but at least the A and B chronotype. And that means like I like to work in the morning or I like to work in the afternoon. How is your energy placed during the day? But it also affects digestion. It has some impact on which time of day you would have stronger body, like if you do a workout, if it should be in the morning or afternoon. But what is especially important is your sleep, because it's very important for our health that we have a good night's sleep, especially if we have a stressful everyday life, then maybe it is extra important that we can also sleep at night. And if you have too much artificial light, we can say, or you get affected by light at nighttime, it can suppress your melatonin production. Melatonin is a hormone that when it rises, you get tired, and then it should sort of help you fall asleep. But if it is suppressed, then you also push your sleep a bit. If people suffer from jet lag, for example, then this rhythm can be pushed. Maybe we all tried that we traveled somewhere and then we have a hard time following the new rhythm of the new country or city we sort of entered in. And then light can actually help you quite a lot, because if you wake up in the morning and you sort of go outside and you see the daylight or you have some bright light, then it can sort of help sort of onset your circadian rhythm. And it is also very well known therapeutic form. From some doctors can prescribe light therapy to you if you suffer from a winter depression or something like that.
I think that's very known in Denmark.
Yeah.
In the country, which is basically in the darkness for half of the year. I heard one of the recommendations being the lamp that you can just use a bit in the morning and then you get all the vitamin D and everything is fine.
Yeah. I think that both for people in the Nordics and also I know for people in retirement homes, it can be very good to have this, but actually it would be extremely good if people would just wake up and go outside. You know, like one thing is the artificial light we can sort of introduce inside, but if we have the opportunity to go outside, even on a rainy day, then the amount of light that you still sort of receive, that would be sufficient to sort of let your body know, now it is day, now I should start. And yeah, this is also extremely interesting topic.
Yeah, okay. So we have the circadian rhythm, which is very interesting. I was actually reading about it. There is a book about circadian rhythm. I think it's called Chasing the Sun. And I read it a couple of years ago and it really like opened my eyes to the topic of the circadian rhythm and why is it all important. So we know that there are some advantages of the darkness for the humans, but you have already mentioned some animals and the bats.
Yeah.
That's also something that you are trying to emphasize here, that it's not only about humans, it's also about designing for all different animals and insects and birds and so on. How do you do that? How do you approach that?
So we all know that we have a planetary crisis, and sometimes we are very focused, or it's also hard because it is, I feel like it's equally important, right? It is not that one is more important than the other, but we have all this carbon emission, and that is especially our industry is responsible for a lot of that with all the construction, but also we at the same time create a lot of environments that are not allowing for biodiversity. And if we lose, let's say the bees, for example, to pollinate, then we have a much bigger crisis also, because how will we get food? And it is just a huge thing. So
you can swear on the podcast, so you could say we are.
Yeah. So what I just want to say is that I think it is so important that we all try to understand that it is actually a big problem also, that we are losing more and more insects and birds. And at least when I walk around in the city, I feel like it is less insects than when I was a kid. And I don't know if it's because we build more and more, or if it's because it is just, yeah. But at least in this office or at SLA, we really try to create the best possible habitats for animals to thrive. And we really want to attract more animals also to the urban scale, but no matter which area we work with. And I think it is also not just a professional thing, like also in our apartments or our balconies, like we should create small sort of green pockets so that we can give some nice places for animals to forage in the city center. But if we have a lot of light, it can be very, very harmful. Let's say we create a park and then we put up a lot of very nice looking lamps, and they are shining upwards, outwards, downwards, like everywhere that animals approach it, they can see this light. And some insects, they get so attracted that they will sort of circle around the light for the entire night. They will forget that they have to, let's say, what is that called in English? Is it called procreate?
Yeah.
So, and then also some will get eaten because the birds are very clever. They understand that they can go and hunt next to these lamps. So that's one thing. Another thing is that if these birds are traveling, it is very much for migratory birds, and they have all this light pollution, they can get disoriented or even trapped. So I think one of the most sort of well-known examples is this tribute at the World Trade Center at Ground Zero. And there is, like they say, thousands of birds get trapped in these lasers.
In the article, it was said 160,000.
Yeah.
Every year.
Every year. Yeah. And the thing is that when they are migrating, they have to fly very far. So even if it sounds like a little thing that they get caught there for one day, apparently it is sort of, they are using so much energy trying to escape this light where they are sort of caught. I think we all know we come with the car and some rabbit gets caught in the, in the street in front of us, or it cannot escape from this, the cone of light that you have in from your car. And this is happening also with the migratory birds. So you are sort of, or not you, we are sort of creating a very big barrier with our cities. It can also be from, we call them sort of the crown of towers. You know, a lot of big cities, they have very prominent high-rises. And then, of course, the people that decide they want to build this, they want to have a very nice rooftop, or, they want to have some light up there so that people can see, look how tall my tower is. But this is also creating a big barrier, and a lot of birds somehow end up flying into those. And especially in the US, they have a lot of voluntary groups that walk around the streets to catch or collect all the dead birds. So there are sort of these lights out initiatives now all over the States, where in the migratory season, all the high-rises have to turn off the light at night so that the birds don't sort of get disoriented and end up flying into the houses.
I think it's a great measure. I would like to come back to that, but one sentence maybe, or two. Mm-hmm. I think it's going to be very hard to just mention it in one sentence, but it's not only humans, it's not only animals, but it's also the trees. Also in the article, something that made me very interested in is that the supposedly trees that grow adjacent to streetlights tend to lose their natural rhythm as well due to the light. How crazy is that?
Yeah, isn't it wild? It was also a bit of a shock to me. We also have some plant experts here in-house. And what I understood from one of my colleagues is that, and now she may correct me if I'm wrong, but that from the leaf, it only catches light from the top side, you can say. I don't know the correct words for the top and bottom side of a leaf, but only from the top, because that's where the sun usually comes from. So this is not so much due to our uplights that we are also trying to reduce, but this is from if you have street light or some spot placed next to the tree, then the tree will hold on to the leaf longer and ultimately not shed the foliage for fall or winter. I remember from studying that one of my teachers, he was explaining that you can see on a leaf of a tree that the small veins in the leaves get thinner if a tree has been placed close to light, because it doesn't get this, you can say, the night sleep, so that you can somehow see that it gets weaker, you could say, from being close to the tree, because that it sort of loses this natural rhythm of night and day also. It is not just night and day, it is also the seasonal change that is the big problem, as I understand it. Yeah. And can I also add that with trees, it is also not just this seasonality, but it is also a problem because a lot of animals hide in the trees. So it can also potentially sort of destroy a habitat if the tree is very close to light, because then animals will not believe that they can hide well enough there. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. And I thought I will jump to another topic, but it is actually related because it's about safety. right? The animals try to hide, so they are remaining safe in a very dangerous environment. And safety is something that I would love to discuss because I think that this is maybe one of the biggest questions, or one of the ones that you get probably most often,
Yes.
which is how can we make sure that our spaces, our urban spaces, our parks remain safe, where you start limiting the light and instead you introduce the darkness?
Yes, that is a super good question. So I don't have the exact answer, but I can explain how we work with it, at least. Because I think safety it's a very strong word, like what is safe? Or like, I want to create a safe space. What is safe for me? What is safe for you? You are male, I am female. That alone will create a bias in this question. Then there can be a question of, I think, age, maybe personality, maybe culture. If we look at the perceived safety in cities all over the world, then let's just assume that every city has some very safe areas and some unsafe areas. And that can be due to a lot of factors. Usually, the unsafe places could also be maybe more poor or deprived neighborhoods. And a lot of municipalities, or maybe even countries, can have a strategy that is, the more unsafe this area is, let's put more light. So if you walk around a new city, you can probably, by looking at the light, decode if it is to be perceived as safe or unsafe. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes.
Yeah. So as an urban planner, this is a very big responsibility, I think, to sort of understand how to work with the light to create safe spaces. So this is just like an introduction to the... I am Danish. I grew up in a very small village close to the ocean or the sea. It's probably... But so I grew up in a place that was very dark at night and very safe. So how do you say? I do not perceive darkness as being unsafe. I perceive darkness as being sort of magical. But I have friends and colleagues that grew up in Southern Europe, and they grew up in cities with a lot of light. And when they came to Denmark to work, they felt that Copenhagen was very unsafe to be in at night, because Copenhagen is one of the darkest capitals of Europe, I think. We have very low light levels compared to other cities in Europe. So already just being sort of Scandinavian, I know that we have some other ways to perceive safety and light than other people. So if I am designing light that should be perceived as safe, it is extremely important to talk to some of the people that live in the area. It's very important to understand the culture, to understand the local requirements, and how we can work with those requirements or bend them in a way that people will not feel that it's a mistake or that something has been broken. Like if you enter a park and you feel that, maybe this is very dark compared to the park over there, like, do I really want to enter? It shouldn't be like that. So we try to work with our anthropologist, is a very good example, to understand what kind of people are here, how do they use the park at night, and what would be good to provide for them. And then we try to work with reducing uplight which is basically the light that has no purpose. So we always shield our lights. We shine the light downwards. And then we try to work with our materials also, because if you have a very dark paving, then it will absorb the light a lot. So if you have also lighter paving or work with different materials, then that can sort of help a lot with sort of your wayfinding or with sort of like orientating yourself in a space. Then we try to work with vertical light to sort of create a better sort of spatial awareness. We work with warmer light to reduce the attraction for insects and animals. And then it's also, I think, very interesting to create some sort of visually appealing spaces. So what we could call like the aesthetics of the light. Did it answer your question?
Yeah, I think so. Especially interesting part with safety being very subjective. I would definitely say that my upbringing was different. I was born in Warsaw and I was living in suburbs of Warsaw for almost the 21st years of my life. And I remember that I'm originally from Poland. And I remember that when we joined the European Union, there were a lot of funds. There were like a lot of investments in the infrastructure, including streets, street lights, and parks, for example. And I even remember some parks being, so to say, revitalized. But it often meant putting more lights and more concrete paving and alleys. And I don't know, like I perceive them in a way more safe because of the light.
Yeah.
But it's just interesting to hear that it's very subjective and it's actually not exactly the way, right? It might be actually the sign of the opposite of safety.
Yeah. And also, I think that, of course, I would also feel more safe in darkness in the countryside than darkness in the city, probably because I think it's also something combined with, how do you say, your previous experiences, but also it's a lot about uncertainty, I think. Like if you know what will happen when you turn the corner, like then there is nothing to worry about. But if you don't know, then it can be perceived as very unsafe. You don't know if someone is going to jump out and ask for your wallet, or you don't know if someone will sort of come on a bike and drive into you. You know, like there can be a lot of things to be scared of, because darkness in its own capacity is not dangerous, right? It is because there are things you cannot see. And that sort of leads to the understanding of how the eye works, because the eye is sort of adapting to all the different light we see during the day. And the problem at night is that we change from our daytime vision to our nighttime vision. And the nighttime vision is not so detailed, but it sees it more sort of in black and white. But every time our eye is introduced to a light source, then the eye sort of switches back and forth. So then you don't really get the details of the daytime vision. And also you don't get the benefits of the nighttime vision because the eye takes some time to adapt. And one of the things we have to think about with that is to reduce the glare from the lights, because if you look straight into a light source, then your eye sort of gets more disturbed than if you don't see the actual light. So if you have a park and all the light is shielded well and aimed downwards or aimed at the path or aimed at a wall or something, then it becomes easier for your eye to see what happens further down this path, you could say. But there is also another question, like, do we actually need to walk in the parks at night? You know, like it's sort of a urbanist question. Like when you design a space, is the park for humans at night or is it for animals?
I think it's a good question. And there are some parks, especially in the United Kingdom, that are just closed. I've seen a lot of them. I think it was in Edinburgh, in Scotland, actually. And it was very interesting to me that there were parks that were just closed. For example, it was 8 p.m. and there was a guard saying, okay, unfortunately, you need to get out because we are closing the park. So there are solutions for that. But I would like to focus on those urban areas that we've already mentioned now, because we discussed the advantages of darkness and the main actors, so to say, humans and animals and trees. And now that, the role of the lights. I think it's important for us also to discuss this kind of urban scale. Since, of course, this is a podcast about urbanism, I cannot ask you about the city scale. You said that Copenhagen is perceived as a city that is quite dark compared to other cities. I don't think I can agree on that.
But that's very interesting.
And again, I think it's very subjective because to me, on the street where I live, I also live in the kind of a city center area. I think it's actually very, very light, especially when I'm going to sleep. There are a lot of people still watching the TVs. And I think that the wall that is facing our living room is also other people's living rooms. There's a lot of artificial light also from the street lamps just coming into the living room. And I was wondering if there were some measures that we could introduce to decrease the light in our cities, but on those like kind of very big areas, because you've mentioned already about those policies in the US where they turn off the lights in the buildings for the birds. Would you say that there are any other possible measures that cities could introduce, the city mayors could introduce to reduce the light in the cities?
Actually, there is a very interesting case, you could say, because during the energy crisis we had last winter, then a lot of the cities in Denmark, they decided that they had to cut down on the cost of energy. So that also meant that a lot of cities, they decided to either turn off the light during the night or, like best case, dim it down. I assume that the big issue you have with the street light coming into your apartment is because the city of Copenhagen changed all the light to LED some years ago. And one of the, you could say, disadvantages is that now we have some very bright LED boards that some people in the city center, maybe if you have an apartment in an unfortunate height, you could say, then you have a very good viewing angle into the light source. No, but not anymore about that. If you look at this example from the energy crisis, a lot of cities have the LED lights, but they did not invest in this technology that allows them to just use a computer to dim it all down. In many projects, we propose that there is a dimming scheme that could be, let's say that it's controlled by an astronomical clock, so that when the sun goes down and the city becomes sort of more dark, you say like the blue hour, then you start your light system. And maybe it is at 100%. But then after the blue hour, you could actually dim it down a bit. And then after 11, maybe you could maybe dim it even lower. A lot of the people that travel, especially outside the city centers, they somehow manage to go around without any light in the streets. Like if you leave Copenhagen, there will be a lot of cities where the streets are with no light. So if you go there, it would be the normal procedure because cars have front lights, so it somehow works out. But in the city center, it can be a bit more tricky because you have a lot of mixed pedestrians. It's tricky to turn the light off completely because you have cars, bikes, motorbikes, pedestrians. At night, not so many kids, right? That would be the more problem. But it would be very, very good if, at least in design phase, that it will be a priority to include these control systems that would allow you to dim it down. It also reduces the cost quite a lot. in some areas, you also introduce sensors that could detect if you, like, let's say on a bike path, some areas are experimenting with this, that lights are sensor-based, and then when you arrive or in your car or on your bike, then maybe one light behind you and 2 or 3 lights in front of you will be turned on, so you will be followed by the light, which is also very interesting, right?
I would like to imagine how would it work. Actually, it would be a lot of on and off light.
Exactly.
I don't know if that's going to be good for the animals either.
Also, that's a big problem because we don't have a lot of research. So for now, what we know is that no light is better. Low light is better than a lot of light. Warm light is better than cold light. And then it's also like very interesting to see like how many people are there. I would assume that it's better to have a very low light on a steady than the light going on and off all the time. Just because it seems that it would be very annoying for us as humans, so probably it's the same for the animals.
I could just imagine myself. I think it would be just very confusing if you are on a bike somewhere on a bike path and you are going home and those lights are just turning on just in front of you, and then they just go off right after you pass. I think it would be just very interesting to observe. I
think you can try it in Albertslund. I think they have this test center where you can go and experience different street lights.
Okay, it's just outside of Copenhagen, so actually I think it would be a good idea to go and try.
Yeah.
But we're getting more and more light. It's getting brighter and brighter, which I really love.
Yeah.
But I think we need to emphasize in this discussion that darkness is important, especially giving space to the natural darkness. And that's why I wanted to talk to you today, because that's a great topic. And although we don't have that much research yet, I hope that this conversation contributes to more knowledge about the role of the darkness. And to spread the word, so to say, even more, would you recommend a book? Close to the topic would be ideally.
So, to be honest, I am a bit more into reading research than actual books. I did sort of bring a few things. So there is this Dutch magazine called Scape, which is a landscape magazine, and we were part of this issue about nightscapes. You can go online. It is Scape second edition of 23, and it has a lot of interesting articles and information about how to work with the nighttime and to sort of try to protect the darkness. I am currently reading up on research that is concerning light and safety, people that are looking into research concerning this. There is a Danish anthropologist, or actually more of them, Siri Svabe and Mikkel Bille and Ida Lærke Klovborg, that looked at Nordvestparken in Copenhagen, that SLA also worked with. They just released a paper this spring. And then I am also very much into this new article that's called Why Flying Insects Gather at Artificial Light. It is a very hot topic right now because some researchers managed to look at how insects behave around light sources through, I think, some sort of 3D mapping equipment. And they can now see that insects sort of try to turn their back at the light at all time. At least that's sort of, and it's super interesting. Like, it has some of the coolest graphs. And so it's just to say, article, Why Flying Insects Gather at Artificial Light. Very interesting. And if I do have to recommend a book...
You are so well prepared, Pernille.
There is a Swedish guy called Johan Eklöf that wrote this darkness manifesto that it is talking about the advantages of the darkness. So much happens all the time within this topic. So it's just go out there, like sign up for webinars, look at the Dark Sky Association, they have also like different material. If you are in Denmark, go to Møn, for example, certified dark sky area, look at some stars. I think that is the most important benefit from the darkness, right? That we actually get to look at the stars. And that is something that I understood that a lot of Danish kids are lacking, this experience of looking at the starry night.
Yeah, it was written in the article that even 41% of kids between the age of 5 to 12 have never been stargazing.
Exactly. Isn't that crazy?
It is.
And it is from this very important webpage called like Ud i Naturen, or like
out in the nature.
Yeah, exactly, out in the nature. And they did some research on how many experiences kids have with nature, and they have asked a lot of different questions. And this like thing about trying to sleep outside in a tent or in a shelter and looking at the stars, that was just like 41% have never tried stargazing. Isn't that crazy? I'm just feeling that this could also make people feel more unsafe in the darkness if they have never exactly.
The beauty of the dark.
Yeah. And also understanding that darkness is not supposed to be scary or completely pitch black darkness, but natural darkness has a lot of colors, and under a full moon it's actually not really dark, you know? All these things are sort of something you have to experience with your own body, I think.
And that was a great summary of this discussion, Pernille. Thank you so much for joining Urbcast and for being very, very inspiring while talking about the darkness.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to the newest episode, which was eye-opening, honestly. I think that the importance of darkness is something that we should talk more about in our urban environments, and overall, as the industry of designers, how do we better design for darkness in our cities so that not only us, but also animals and other species are also safe and feel comfortable in those spaces. And we definitely overdid the light in the cities in recent decades. There are some links in the episode description, and you will also find the article with the key assumptions, key things from this podcast. You can find it on LinkedIn, where you can also find a profile of Urbcast. So I hope to see you there. And I leave you with the sound of the night.